The impact of your 10-year, $252 million deal for Alex Rodriguez back in 2000 was what?
Well, the impact was far greater than I expected because it became a financial news story rather than a baseball sports story. Because everybody came after me and he goes, he's getting double of any athlete in sport. And I said, you understand that we have metrics to evaluate players and valuations that we put on it, and we think this contract is a beneficial contract to teams. And they would go, on what basis? And I started thinking, I go, probably better left without explanation. And I said, just kind of watch this player, because he plays on the dirt, meaning infielder. And I go, when you got a guy that can play on the dirt and hit for power, just start looking historically who does that. Start looking about what advantages it brings to teams who do it. And so the idea of that kind of resonated, and then, you know, ARod won his 3 MVPs, and then he was in the top 2 or 3 multiple times. And then when the contract got transferred, assigned to the Yankees, and many other teams were trying to get him, I kept on reaffirming, see, I had told you that many of you thought that this was some grand owner mistake, and sure enough, he became a world champion, and sure enough, he had a very historic career, you know, as a Yankee. And that first contract, if you look at the valuation of it, is that he really paid for himself in the first 7 years because his performances were that extraordinary above the rest.
What do you think led to your relationship with him going south?
Just philosophical, you know. You have certain things that you want players to do. And I think a player, as he matures, he has a right to listen to who he wants to listen to. And I didn't particularly agree with the people he was listening to. And I have a certain element of integrity with which we do things. And I say, it's just best that, you know, and he said, it's just best that we move in a different direction. He was set for life, his contracts were done, and he kind of moved on. And I just, the game is very difficult for success.
How do you go about figuring out how to navigate it in a way that doesn't turn into more news than it needs to because you're the biggest agent and he's the biggest player?
I just try to keep it, you know, between us. It's our relationship. I've known him since he's a boy. You know, I watch so many things, and you don't ever forget the success, the trials that they have to go through, dealing with greatness. And the one thing I learned through these processes, you don't let greatness get in the way of your judgment of what you need to say. You don't let that performance blind you from saying things that you feel are needed about how they're approaching things.
The only other player of his stature, to my knowledge, that, you know, didn't end on good terms was Barry Bonds. What's your perspective, looking back all these years later, on how that one ended?
Well, Barry was like, Barry's a baseball genius. Wow. He had original thought about the game. I so enjoyed it. You know, he always tried to hide his genius and talk about his skill and talent, but intellectually, he really understood pitchers in the same way that Maddox understood hitters. It was remarkable to hear them talk. But in the end, when you give legal advice and people don't want to be curtailed by it. I understand. That wasn't a bad ending for me, because he came to me. He was really underpaid. He felt as though he was. And I kept on saying, Barry, I understand what you want, but you're hiring me for what my vision is of what you should do. I go, it's your intellect that will allow you to sustain, not just your abilities. I go, I need you to really appreciate how you really dominate this game intellectually, which is why you're going to perform at these levels for a good period of time. And I said, because I remember he came, I had signed Bernie Williams, and he going, look, Bernie Williams is making a lot more money than I am. What's going on? I go, like, contracts and timing are like hitting. I go, if you're off time, you're not going to get the result. You have to have timing in these things of what you want to do. And the unique thing about Barry Bonds was I grew to know that his comfort in San Francisco was the place to be. Free agency, ironically, was not the best to move, was not the best path for him at all. And in the free agent market, people wanted his performance, but they were very concerned about him individually. And I just heard it and heard it and heard it. And really, the free agent market didn't respond to him. And I said, Barry, that's okay. You have other rights to use. I'm going to use arbitration to illustrate your value. And that in and of itself would cause such a disruption of the arbitration process, because your value would be so great. They'll want to give you a multi-year contract, which turned out the Giants are going, we accepted arbitration. The Giants go, well, no other bidders. I said, well, and then sure enough, they gave him the 5-year contract he wanted. And so that was a very important result for me, because I think he benefited from what he learned about us in his valuation. But for me, I benefited so much from being around him and understanding the game that I've been able to pass on to players.